Easy pose. Sukhasana. In all sitting poses, it is very important to maintain spinal curves in neutral position. When holding this position, the ability to rotate the thighs outward is one of the most important kinesiological components. If the rotation movement is limited in any way, it is important to make suitable modifications to facilitate a proper balanced position for the pelvis and the spine above it.
Sitting positions. Cross-legged sitting kinesiological background. Under normal conditions, the position of the lower limb joints during cross-legged sitting is knee flexion, hip flexion, lateral rotation of the hip, slight anterior pelvic tilt, lower vertebrae in a neutral position, slight lumbar lordosis. In kinesiological terms, the normative range of rotation in the hip joint is 60 degrees. In a cross-leg sitting position, the range necessary during lateral rotation of the hip joint is much larger. A range of movement of 90 degrees is necessary in order to correctly assume the position. A restricted range in lateral rotation of the hip joint will restrict the ability to sit cross-legged. The most prominent trait will be expressed by a raising of the knee. As a result of the raising of the knees, additional chain reactions take place, which also begin to affect the position of the pelvis and vertebral column. Sitting positions. Sitting cross-legged. The functional relationship between the hip joints and back region. Under normal conditions, when sitting cross-legged, there is slight anterior pelvic tilt and the lower back is in a neutral position. Restriction in lateral rotation of the hip joints will cause lifting of the knees. 1. Restriction in the thigh. 2. Lifting of the knees will cause posterior pelvic tilt. 3. Posterior pelvic tilt will cause a flexed position of the lumbar vertebrae that will be expressed in flattening of the lumbar lordosis. 4. Flattening of the lordosis. Posterior pelvic tilt will cause a flexed position of the lumbar vertebrae that will be expressed in flattening of the lumbar lordosis. 5. Kyphotic position. 6. Restricted respiration. The rounded position of the vertebral column tends to cause the center of gravity of the body to deviate backwards. In order to prevent backwards collapse, the trainee is required to activate the hip flexors and the abdominal muscles. The bent forward position along the entire vertebral column causes compressive pressure on the lumbar vertebrae and symptoms of pain in the lower back following prolonged exercising. In conclusion, under conditions of prolonged sitting in which the trainee is unable to maintain slight anterior pelvic tilt, continuous pressure is exerted on the lower back. Sitting cross-legged. The functional relationship between
horizontal abduction at the hip joint. In a normative position, the adductors are lengthened. Shortening of these muscles limits abduction and causes elevation of the knees. Another muscle limitation could be shortening of the hip external rotator muscles. Elevating the knees causes the pelvis to rotate backwards, and this triggers a chain reaction that activates many stabilizing muscles and makes the position more active than passive. Solution 1 is elevation using a pillow or a stool. The higher the pelvis, the greater is the thigh angle, and the pelvis is free to rotate forward. Anterior pelvic tilt makes it possible to maintain a neutral spinal position while the trunk erect and elongated upward. Elevation reduces knee flexion and releases the pelvis to rotate forward slightly. Solution 2 is preparatory exercises to make the hip joint more flexible. These exercises will focus in lateral and internal rotation of the hip joint and hip abduction in the horizontal plane. Solution 3 is leaning the back against the wall. Leaning the trunk against a wall supports the back and pelvis. Assuming this position when one's lateral rotation is limited and without wall support stimulates many muscles to act as stabilizers, colored red. Solution 4 is moving the feet away from the pelvis. Difficulty in performing lateral rotation with horizontal abduction of the hip will become evident in raising the knees. In this situation, pushing the thighs down will trigger a chain reaction that places a heavy load on the knees. Moving the feet away from the pelvis will reduce the flexion angle of the hip and release the pelvis to rotate slightly forward. Rotating the pelvis forward, anterior tilt, allows a greater potential to maintain an elongated and erect back. Common problem. Problem 2. The knees are high and the pelvis is tilted posteriorly because of increased inversion due to structural restriction. Solution. There is no need to force the trainee to lower the knees. The cause for high knees is structural, and any attempt to force the legs to be lower when sitting may cause damage to the knee joints. It is recommended to sit with support from a wall. The knees are high and the pelvis is tilted posteriorly because of increased femoral anteversion, a structural problem. Problem 2. The knees are high and the pelvis is tilted posteriorly because of increased inversion due to structural restriction. Solution. There is no need to force the trainee to lower the knees. The cause for high knees is structural, and any attempt to force the legs to be lower when sitting may cause damage to the knee joints. It is recommended to sit with support from a wall. The knees are high and the pelvis is tilted posteriorly because of increased femoral anteversion, a structural problem. Problem 2. The knees are high and the Problem 3. Difficulty in bending the knees due to functional shortening of the quadriceps. Shortened quadriceps, especially the three heads connected to the thigh, makes flexing the knee difficult. Solution. Preparatory exercise to lengthen the quadriceps. Problem 3. Difficulty in bending the knees due to functional shortening of the quadriceps. Shortened quadriceps, especially the three heads connected to the thigh, makes flexing the knee difficult. Solution. Preparatory exercise to lengthen the quadriceps. Problem 3. Difficulty in bending the knees due to functional shortening of the quadriceps. Shortened quadriceps, especially the three heads connected to the thigh, makes flexing the knee difficult. Solution. Preparatory exercise to lengthen the quadriceps. Problem 3. Difficulty in bending the knees due to functional shortening of the quadriceps. Shortened quadriceps, especially the three heads connected to the thigh, makes flexing the knee difficult. Solution. Preparatory.
Possible causes for restriction in lateral rotation. Part A. Anatomical structure of the femur. One of the causes for restrictions in movement of the thigh is related to the anatomical structure of the femur. One of the factors that affect rotation movements is the torsion angle of the femur. Here is the femoral neck and the femoral condyles. The torsion angle is created between the connection of the longitudinal line of the femoral neck and the line connecting the two femoral condyles. Under normal conditions, the torsion angle is 12 degrees. This angle enables the flexion movement of the thigh to be smoothly integrated with the rotation movements. Sometimes a structural problem is created that is expressed in a smaller or larger than normal angle. Changes in the torsion angle may create postural problems in the lower limbs. An increased angle, more than 12 degrees, will be expressed in a toe in position, anteversion. A smaller than normal angle, less than 12 degrees, will cause a toe out position, retroversion. On the left, it's retroversion, and on the right, it's anteversion. People with anteversion will find it very difficult to sit in positions that create lateral rotation in the hip. In this case, the cause for this is structural, and any attempt to force the legs to be lower during sitting may cause damage to the knee joints. The body takes the movement to the place where it is comfortable, and this will be expressed in increased rotation of the knees. Possible causes for restriction in lateral rotation. Possible causes for restriction in lateral rotation. Part B. Lack of muscular balance. A possible cause for restriction in lateral rotation is a lack of balance between the muscles that perform inward or outward rotation in the hip joint. In the horizontal plane, a functional balance between the groups of muscles that rotate the thigh inwards and outwards is especially important. The muscles that perform lateral rotation of the hip are the obturator externus, the obturator internus, the iliopsoas, and the hip adductors. Adductors from a posterior view. Adduct and rotate the hip. Sartorius, piriformis, gluteus medius. Opposite, muscles that perform medial rotation of the hip pectinus. Gluteus minimus, anterior fibers. Gluteus medius, anterior fibers. Adductor magnus, vertical head. Shortness of the internal rotators muscle will create a restriction in cross-leg sitting. Contraction of the gluteus medius muscle. The solution? Flexibility exercises for these muscles in preparation for performing sitting positions.